In the heart of that whiteness stood a cabin, humble and alone, its windows dimly lit from within. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, like a whisper of life in a land that had forgotten how to speak. Inside, Claire Millen sat by the fire, her needle dancing through wool with the grace of long habit. She was mending a child's sock, small, blue, the kind with wear in the toes. Her hands worked gently, though no child would wear it now. It was something she'd kept, one of the few things she let herself do. Just one sock at a time, no pairs. She folded it quietly beside the others, her eyes lingering only a moment before she reached for another. The hearth crackled, its light soft on her weather-lined face. She wore her hair in a braid like rope down her back, gray creeping at the temples. Her eyes were sharp, though, like frost on glass, blue, unreadable. Claire had lived alone for nearly a year now, ever since the fever took her boy and left the world quieter than it should have been. The neighbors came at first, with pies and sad eyes and borrowed scripture, but grief was not a social thing for Claire. She let the door stay closed. The land was enough. The fire, the mule in the stable, and the snow, always falling, soft and without question. The hour had drawn near dusk, the world beyond the cabin turning indigo, when the knocking came, not at the door, but from outside the barn. Not a fist, but something softer. A hand. An animal. Claire rose, heart suddenly alive in her chest. She pulled her shawl tight and took her rifle from above the mantel. Not loaded, just presence enough. She stepped outside, boots crunching into the deepening snow, the cold air curling into her lungs like smoke. The wind had stilled. She found them huddled beneath the lean-to roof, barely visible. 3 children, thin as shadows, wrapped in what looked like torn flour sacks and a deer hide so tattered it hung in ribbons. 2 girls clung together, wide-eyed, hair tangled and cheeks blistered red. A boy, younger, no more than 3, sat slumped, silent. Claire's heart clenched in a way it hadn't for months. The oldest girl blinked up at her. Didn't speak. Just looked. Then a sound behind her, a footstep, low in the snow. She turned. He stood several yards away, tall, dark against the pale world, not moving. His arms hung at his sides, open, palms showing. He wore no coat. Only worn leather and a blanket tied at the waist. His breath steamed in the cold. He made no motion toward her, no plea. Just met her eyes and waited. Claire gripped the rifle tighter. You lost. Her voice cracked from disuse. No answer. Just those eyes, black as night and just as still. Comanche. She'd seen few in town, fewer still since the raids 5 years back. Folks didn't forget blood, even when it was spilled by white hands first. She glanced at the children again. One girl had started to cry, a sound like wind through glass. Claire sighed, low and bitter, as if the air itself had chosen this moment to undo her. Get inside, she said, not to him, but to the children. She pointed toward the house. Go. They hesitated, then moved as one, like foals unsure of their footing. The boy stumbled. She caught him before he hit the ground. He was burning up under his thin rags. Starved. Sick. She didn't look at the man again. Just turned and walked toward the house, child in her arms. The door stayed open behind her. An invitation, maybe. Or a test. Inside, she set the boy near the hearth and gestured to the girls. They clustered close to their brother, their small hands smoothing his hair, whispering words in a language Claire didn't know. She fetched broth, weak but warm, and dipped bits of bread into it. One girl took the spoon and fed the others, sharing evenly, silently. They moved like they'd done this 100 times before. The door creaked again. He had come in finally, and stood just inside the threshold, not near the fire, not near them. He smelled of wet leather and horse. His feet were bare. Claire motioned to a blanket draped over a chair. Take it. I'm not looking to bury anyone else this winter. Still, he said nothing. But he nodded, once, and took the blanket. Sat near the door, back straight. Watching. Only when the boy began to cough, deep, rattling, did Claire kneel beside him. She touched his forehead, too hot, and her gut turned. Pneumonia, maybe. She couldn't be sure. She'd lost her own too quick to catch the name. He needs help. She didn't know why she was saying it aloud. Behind her, the man shifted. When she turned, he had produced a pouch from his belt, cloth, and cedar bark. He held it out. She took it and sniffed. Pine, willow, something bitter. She didn't question. She boiled water and made the tea. Later, the boy slept, sweat slick on his brow. The girls curled beside him, soothed for now. Claire sat in her rocker and finally looked at the man full on. "You their father?" He nodded. "Names?" His voice came, low and rough. "Toma, Leah, Suri." Claire gestured to the boy. "His name is Hawk." Claire let the names settle in her chest. She studied him again. His cheekbone bore a faint scar, old and healed, his shoulders lean but strong. Not a drifter. Not a beggar. A man stripped to survival. "How long you been walking?" "Since the ice came." His English was clear but heavy, like a song sung too slow. Claire closed her eyes a moment. The snow had started 2 weeks back, steady. They'd been in it the whole time. That night passed without sleep. Claire kept to her rocker, listening to the child's breathing. The fire popped. Outside, snow fell again. At dawn, she rose. Mixed flour and water, made thin cakes on the griddle. The girls stirred, blinking like owlets in morning light. Hawk coughed, but softer now. When she handed them food, they didn't thank her. Just ate, carefully, reverently. The man, Hawk's father, stood before the fire but didn't touch it. He looked at Claire, his eyes softer in daylight. "I will leave," he said. Claire looked up from her bowl. "And take them into that storm? I bring danger. You bring children." She said it like a rebuke, sharper than she meant. He said nothing. "I've got a stable. Feed. You work, you eat. That's the deal." He nodded. For the next 2 days, they barely spoke. He chopped wood, fixed the hinge on her door, repaired a broken wheel. Efficient. Silent. The children grew brighter, their eyes less sunken. Leah sang to her brother in the evenings. Claire listened from her chair, her needlework still in hand but forgotten. On the 3rd night, after Hawk slept easy and the fire burned low, Claire stepped outside. Snow swirled under a thin moon. She watched her breath drift, heard the crunch of his footsteps behind her. "They'll ask questions," she said. "If folks in town see you." "I won't go." She turned. His face was unreadable in the dark, but she could feel his meaning. "They'll come here." His shoulders rose in a breath, slow. "Then I'll leave." She didn't want that. She realized it suddenly, quietly. It sat in her chest like an ember. "Not yet," she said. "Let's just get through the next storm." He looked at her for a long time. Behind them, a child laughed in sleep. Claire looked to the horizon. Snow again tomorrow. She could smell it in the air. But inside, for the first time in months, the fire felt warm. Something had shifted, barely, but true. She didn't know yet what it was. Only that strangers had come in from the cold, and she hadn't shut the door. And somehow, the world felt different for it. The days that followed settled like ash after a fire. Soft, quiet, clinging to everything. Snow still ruled the land, but it was the kind that fell lazy and fine, more a curtain than a storm. Inside the cabin, the cold pressed in at the edges but never reached the hearth, where warmth lived not just in flame but in the hush of breathing children, in the gentle creak of wood beneath moving feet, and in the slow rebuilding of a rhythm that none of them yet dared call home. Claire rose before the sun, as she always had, slipping from her cot with practiced care. The children still slept on the pallet near the fire, tangled limbs and slow breaths, their little bodies rising and falling like tides. She stepped past them quietly, poured water from the kettle left to warm overnight, and set it to boil again. Her movements were efficient, but not rushed. There was something about those small faces at rest that softened the morning. Outside, the crunch of footsteps on snow told her chain was already at work. He never waited for instruction. He rose with the light, split wood, repaired broken shingles, cleared paths through drifts. He moved like a man who owed a debt he would never speak aloud. She stepped out onto the porch with 2 mugs, steam curling into the pale morning. He was stacking the last of the logs under the awning, shirtless beneath his hide vest despite the cold, arms corded with quiet strength. His breath plumed in the air. "You'll lose your fingers," Claire said, holding out a mug. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then took the drink with a quiet nod. His hands were rough, the nails split. She noticed the faint tremor in his fingers when they curled around the tin. They stood side by side for a moment, saying nothing. The wind had died. Snow glittered on every branch like lace. From the barn, the mule brayed, and beyond it, the prairie stretched wide and white and still. Claire turned her gaze toward the horizon. "You always work like this?" His voice came low. "Idle hands bring sorrow." She didn't reply, just sipped her tea, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. She understood them too well. After Thomas died, she kept moving for the same reason. Canning, scrubbing, chopping kindling she'd never burn. It was better than stopping. Stopping meant remembering. Remembering meant drowning. That morning, the girls helped her knead dough. Their small hands floured and clumsy, their laughter sudden and shy. Suri, the quieter of the twins, had taken to following Claire everywhere, grasping her apron hem, mimicking her motions. When Claire handed her a spoon, she held it like treasure. She watched them from the corner of her eye. The children had begun to bloom. Hawk still coughed at night, but his eyes were clearer now. Leia chattered to him in Comanche, voice rising and falling like wind over hills. Claire understood none of it, but the melody soothed her. Chain never hovered, but he always knew where they were. His presence was a constant, not intrusive, just there. Fixing, carrying, watching. She found herself looking for him without meaning to. In town, they'd have called her foolish. A white woman sheltering an Indian man with no priest's blessing or paper to name them kin. But there was no town here, only land and snow and breath and silence. Still, trouble did not need an invitation. It came on a Tuesday, when the wind shifted and the snow turned wet. Claire had hitched the mule to her small sled and made the trip to town for lye, flour, and a bit of sugar. She didn't bring the children. Didn't bring Chain either. That decision, silent, deliberate, coiled tight in her gut as she pulled into Bitter Ridge's single muddy street. She kept her shoulders straight under her shawl. Let them talk, she thought. Let them wonder. Old Josiah, who ran the mercantile, gave her a long look. "Heard tell you got company out at the Millen place." Claire didn't blink. "I've got mouths to feed." He leaned forward on his elbows, squinting at her. "The red kind." She fixed him with the look she used to give coyotes near the henhouse. "The hungry kind." He said nothing after that, just rang up her supplies with slower hands. Outside, wind tugged at her skirts. A young boy spat in the snow as she passed, muttering something about breed brats. She didn't stop, didn't flinch. But when she reached the edge of town, she let the mule pause, breathing hard. She wasn't afraid, not for herself. But the old unease crept back, the kind that didn't live in muscle or blood but in reputation. What a woman did alone was always louder than what a man did in full daylight. When she returned, the cabin lights were glowing, and laughter spilled faint from the windows. For a moment, she simply stood and listened. That sound, fragile joy, wrapped around her like a shawl. Inside, Chain had cleaned the hearth and made a stew. The girls ran to her, hands full of wild onions. Hawk held up a pine cone he'd painted with ash and berry juice. Claire knelt, one knee stiff, and drew them close. "Missed me already?" They nodded against her shoulder. She held them longer than needed. Later, when the children slept and the wind rattled the shutters, she sat across from Chain at the table. She stirred her cup without drinking. "They know you're out there," she said. He looked up, face calm. "They always know. They'll come." He didn't argue, just folded his hands, knuckles scarred. "I won't let them take you," she said softly. "Not the children, either." Chain's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Something not said, not claimed, but steady. He didn't thank her. She didn't want him to. But in his gaze was a kind of honoring, and in hers a quiet vow. He stood then, gathered the dishes, and began to wash. She watched the muscles in his back move beneath the fabric, watched how gently he dried the bowls, thought about her husband, about how Thomas used to slam plates when he was angry, how he'd call her too soft, too slow, and how softness, perhaps, was not weakness at all. Perhaps it was strength, reimagined. As she watched Chain by the firelight, something new began to stir in her, not quick like a flame, but low and embered, as though a life she'd thought long extinguished had flickered awake. That night, she did not sit in her rocker after the children slept. Instead, she walked outside. The snow had stopped. Stars blinked coldly above the prairie, distant and dispassionate. Behind her, she heard the cabin door open. She didn't turn. "I used to think the world ended the day my boy died," she said. "Everything since then's just been shadows." Chain stepped up beside her. Said nothing. Claire's breath trembled. "But there's laughter now, and soup that smells like something real. And I don't know what that means." Chain looked out over the white land. Sometimes, ashes feed new fire. They stood in the silence after that, shoulder to shoulder, not touching. The wind picked up again, tugging at her hair. She let it lift and pull and remind her she was still alive. When she turned back toward the house, she felt him beside her, not leading, not following, just walking with her. And for the first time in a long, long while, Claire did not dread tomorrow. She did not count days or ration memory. She just walked back into the light, with a man she didn't yet call friend but no longer called stranger. The children murmured in sleep as the door closed behind them. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else, something like hope, warm as an ember in the snow. The days grew longer in ways only a quiet heart could notice. The sun lingered just a breath more each evening, brushing the edges of the snow with gold before vanishing behind the far hills. The wind lost its teeth, becoming a gentler thing, more whisper than warning. Yet inside Claire's chest, the season remained uncertain, thawing only by inches. The children changed first. Not all at once, but in pieces. Leia began singing again, real songs, not just the sleep humming she'd done in the early days. Claire didn't understand the words, but the tune had a rise and fall that tugged something loose in her. It sounded like belonging. Suri followed her now not just for safety, but out of trust. She'd taken to carrying one of Claire's old handkerchiefs, tying it around her wrist like a token. Hawk still coughed, but there was laughter in it now, a giggle snuck into each fit like it had stolen its place there. His cheeks had filled out. His eyes no longer scanned the corners of rooms like they expected danger. Chain moved through the days as steady as a shadow, never idle, never loud. He repaired the chicken coop and lined the barn with salvaged boards, making it tighter against the wind. He carved toys for the children, small animals shaped from pine, a rabbit, a fox, a mule with crooked legs that made Suri laugh so hard she dropped it in the stew pot by accident. He never scolded her, just fished it out, dried it, and tucked it back into her small hand like it was still the most important thing in the world. Claire watched him as she might watch a fire she wasn't sure would hold, fascinated, cautious, drawn to the warmth but still measuring the distance. He rarely spoke, but when he did, the words landed like stones dropped in water, soft but deep, rippling through whatever silence had come before. He never asked to stay. She never told him to. Still, he didn't leave, and she didn't make room for anyone else. Each morning now began with something shared, bread, a pot of tea, the passing of tools between hands. The children helped where they could. Leia had a good grip with the broom. Hawk liked to follow the mule when Chain worked the soil, pretending to be a plowman. Suri would sit at Claire's feet on the porch, shelling peas or stringing beans, never needing words. One morning, Claire found herself brushing Suri's hair and humming without meaning to. The girl leaned back into her legs, warm and trusting. Chain sat nearby, whittling a spoon from maple. His eyes lifted for a moment and met Claire's. She didn't look away. Sometimes she thought about her husband, about Thomas's scowl when she sat still too long, his voice rough from whiskey and pride. He'd called her weak when she wept, slow when she cared too much for dying calves or broken-winged birds. He'd left bruises not on her skin, but in her spirit, heavy enough to carry long after the grave took him. She had buried more than a man that winter. She'd buried the version of herself who waited for someone to see her. But now she was being seen. Not admired, not pitied, seen. One afternoon, she caught Chain watching her as she taught Leia the alphabet on the back of a flour sack. The girl traced letters with her finger, mimicking Claire's soft voice. Chain didn't interrupt. He just sat on the porch step, hands clasped, as if he could listen forever. Later, when the children slept, he brought her a smooth piece of wood, thin, rounded, the beginnings of something not yet named. "You teach," he said simply. "I build." She took the wood, ran her thumb along the grain. "What is it?" He shrugged. "A slate. For writing. For her." Claire looked at him then, really looked, and felt something inside her shift. A slow, seismic thing that didn't start in her heart but in her bones, the part of her that remembered how to want without fear. That night she dreamed of fire, but not the destructive kind. It was warm, steady, the kind you build a home around. When she woke, she heard the children breathing beside her, and from the other room, the low rasp of a blade on wood. He was still working, still carving out something better. Spring threatened at the edges of the days now. Birds returned, hesitant but brave. The snow thinned, bearing patches of brown earth and green shoots just starting to push up through last year's death. Claire planted early beans with the girls, fingers in cold dirt, laughter breaking like light through storm clouds. She showed them how to press the seeds down gently, just enough to cover, not to smother. "Everything needs room," she said. Chain heard, though she hadn't meant him to. Later, he laid new stones around the garden bed, silent hands placing each one with reverence. It was near sunset when he finally told her his story. They stood outside, watching the sky drip gold into the distant hills. The air held that soft, in-between scent, part snow, part thaw. Hawks sat by the fence drawing in the dirt. The girls chased each other near the well, giggling in spirals. "She died in spring," he said. His voice was flat, but not empty. "My woman. Fever, then blood. Too much, too fast." Claire said nothing. She didn't move. "We were far then. Too far for help. I buried her under cedar." Walked toward the sun. His eyes didn't meet hers. The children were quiet, like ghosts. "I kept walking. Thought maybe if I moved long enough, the world would forget to be cruel." Claire's throat ached. "Did it?" He turned to her then. "Not yet. But it got softer." She nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Mine died in winter. My boy. I kept cooking for him anyway. Couldn't stop. I still talk to her sometimes," he said. "I still make socks." They stood without speaking for a long while, shadows stretching between them. It wasn't closeness they found then, it was something more rare. Knowing. The kind of knowing that made silence holy. After supper, Claire sat at the table, wiping a spill from the wood. Chain was tucking the children into bed. His voice was low, a murmur in that language Claire still didn't understand. But the cadence had rhythm, like lullabies carried over long roads. When he returned to the table, he didn't sit across from her, but beside her, as if something had shifted without announcement. He placed a small pouch on the table. "For you." She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a carved figure, an eagle with wings open, etched with fine lines and careful hands. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's for watching," he replied. "To keep above the door." Claire touched its wingtip. "You believe it protects?" He nodded. "I believe it remembers. And sometimes, remembering is enough." That night, after the children slept and the fire burned low, Claire stepped onto the porch. The stars scattered above her, brighter than any night before. Chain joined her, not speaking. They stood in a silence shaped by peace, not distance. "Are you staying?" she asked, voice small but steady. He looked out at the land. "I am here." It wasn't a promise. It was a truth. She leaned slightly into his shoulder. Not enough to change the night, but enough to feel its warmth. He didn't move away. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a story still unfolding. Inside, the carved eagle hung above the door, wings outstretched. And within that quiet room, a woman who had been emptied found herself filling, not with noise, but with presence, with the steady, slow becoming of something sacred. Outside, spring crept closer. And inside, the miracle was no longer just survival. It was beginning. It was breath. It was staying. The sky was heavy with the kind of gray that promised more than weather. It hung thick over the land, pressing the horizon inward, dimming the light even at midday. Claire felt it in her bones long before the wind picked up, an unease born not of clouds but of people, of the slow, creeping return of the world they'd tried so hard to stay separate from. Chain sensed it too. His eyes had shifted in recent days, not in fear, but in watchfulness. He moved with less ease around the barn, listening to things she couldn't hear. He kept his tools stored tighter, closed the gates more deliberately. It wasn't the storm they feared. It was the men who rode in before the snow had even finished melting. The first came on a gray mare with one white sock and a coat slick with mud. He didn't knock, just sat at the edge of the yard, eyes narrow under his hat. Claire was washing clothes by the well, her arms elbow-deep in suds when she saw him. Chain stepped out of the barn the same moment, a hammer in hand, not raised, not hidden. The man spat in the dirt and tipped his hat, but the gesture held no kindness. "Been some talk in town," he said. "Reckon it's true then." Claire straightened. Her hands dripped into the basin. "You here for a neighborly visit, or just to gawk?" He grinned. "Heard you'd gone and opened your door to a red man and his mongrel lot. Thought I'd see for myself if Claire Millen had gone full mad." Her heart beat once, hard. She didn't move. "They're children. And he's a better man than you'll ever be." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes cooled. "Town don't take kindly to that sort of thing. Not from a widow. Makes you look touched." Behind her, she heard the cabin door creak open. One of the girls, Leah, maybe, peeking out. Claire stepped forward. "You're done here." The man looked past her at Chain. "You don't belong, savage." Chain didn't speak. He simply held the man's gaze until the air felt like it might snap from the tension. Then, slowly, the rider turned his horse and rode off, snow churning beneath the hooves. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, and the cabin felt suddenly smaller. The children had settled into dreams, their bodies limp with trust. But she sat by the window, watching the dark, every creak of the trees outside turning her pulse. Chain sat across from her, sharpening a blade in long, even strokes. She knew he wasn't doing it for necessity. It was the sound that soothed him. Steel whispering against stone. "They'll come back," she said. He didn't look up. "Yes. And they won't just bring words next time." He nodded once. "I will go." Claire turned sharply. "No." He paused, the blade still in his hand. "You think I can't protect what's mine?" she said, voice low. "I think the land remembers blood. And I will not have yours on it." Claire stood. Her breath shook, but her voice did not. "You don't get to make that choice. Not alone." He looked at her, and something broke in his face, just for a moment. A crack in the stillness. "Where would I go?" he asked. "Where they won't follow?" She had no answer. The world did not make places for men like Chain. It barely made room for women like her. She sat beside him, close. The fire flickered gold against his jaw, his cheek hollowed by tension. "We've made something here," she said. "It's not perfect, and it's not safe. But it's real." Chain's hand, still holding the blade, trembled once before he set it down. "Then we defend it," he said. The next day, she rode to town with a list in her pocket and steel in her spine. The looks came long before the words. Women stepping back as she passed, men narrowing their eyes over their shoulders. No one spat, not this time, but the judgment was thicker than smoke. At the mercantile, Josiah wouldn't meet her eyes as he rang up salt, seed, and nails. "You bringing him into town?" he asked. She didn't pause. "No need. He's busy fixing the place you all would rather see rot." He said nothing more, but as she left, she heard the murmur begin behind her. The town had already decided what kind of woman she was. Let them. She was not the one hiding behind whispers. Back at the ranch, Hawk met her at the path, his cheeks pink from wind, his small arms full of twigs. "We're building traps," he declared proudly. She looked up toward the barn, where Chain knelt in the mud, showing Leah how to tie knots. Claire smiled, but her chest ached. Childhood should not be spent learning how to prepare for war. That evening, Chain helped her carry in the supplies. He moved with the silent efficiency she'd come to rely on. When they unloaded the final sack, he stopped, hand resting on the doorframe. "You sure?" She turned. "About what?" "About staying." Claire stepped closer. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." That night, they made a plan. It wasn't much: reinforce the windows, line the barn with tools that could be weapons if need be. Claire readied her old shotgun, the one Thomas used to keep by the bed. Chain said nothing when she pulled it from under the floorboard, but she saw the way his jaw tightened. "We'll avoid blood if we can," she said. "And if we can't, then we bleed together." It was 3 days later when they came. 5 riders this time, their coats dusted with old snow, their faces hard with the certainty of justice twisted by fear. The same man led them, his grin gone now, replaced by something colder. Claire stood on the porch, shotgun across her arms. Chain stood beside her, unarmed but unflinching. "You've had your say," she called. "Now ride on." "You're sheltering a criminal," the man shouted back. "You think the law won't come down on you for that?" "Then bring the law," she snapped. "But don't come dressed in cowardice, pretending you speak for anything more than your own hate." One of the riders nudged his horse forward. "We don't want trouble, just the Indian." Chain stepped forward. "You'll have to come take me." Claire raised her gun. "And go through me." They hesitated. She saw it in their eyes, that flicker of doubt, that split second of reckoning. She was a woman, yes, but she was not afraid. And fear was what they counted on. The man spat again. "You think this ends with today?" "No," Claire said. "But it starts here." They rode off, slower this time. No shots, no blows. But the promise of return lingered in the dust. When they were gone, Claire let out a breath that had been holding for hours. Chain's hand touched her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Inside, the children had not cried. They sat near the fire, Hawk holding his sisters close. Brave, all of them, in a world that gave them every reason not to be. That night, she didn't sit by the fire. She sat beside Chain on the floor, their backs to the wall, their hands nearly touching. "You were ready to die for me," he said. She turned her head. "I was ready to live for you. There's a difference." His eyes closed, just for a second. When he opened them, something deep had settled in. "You are not like other women." She smiled faintly. "And you're not like other men." He reached then, slowly, as if the moment might shatter. His hand brushed hers. She let it stay. Outside, the sky cracked. Thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was coming. But inside, a fire held strong. And neither of them moved. The last frost melted into the earth like a secret being whispered away. Where snow once ruled, green now pushed up through the softened ground, fragile but insistent. Shoots of wild onion dotted the hills. Sparrows returned to the rafters of the barn, darting through sunlight that poured golden through every gap in the boards. The storm had passed. Not just the one from the sky, but the one that had hovered over the cabin like a shadow waiting to claim it. Claire stood at the edge of the garden bed, sleeves rolled, hands muddy. Beside her, Leah and Suri worked quietly, pressing seeds into the black earth as she had taught them. The rhythm was familiar now. The air smelled of thaw and life and the faint sweetness of old apples. Hawk sat under the cottonwood, carving a stick with the same concentration Chain always had. His small fingers steady, the tip of his tongue caught between his teeth. He was growing fast, bones stretching like the land in bloom. The children no longer flinched when wind rattled the shutters. They no longer looked to the horizon as though something might come from it. They had begun to look inward, to look homeward. Chain came from the pasture with his shirt slung over one shoulder, dust clinging to his skin like a second layer. He walked with the ease of a man who knew he was not being watched for harm. Claire saw him before he spoke, saw the way he moved now. Not tense, not alert, but rooted. A man no longer waiting to be chased. He touched her elbow when he passed, his fingers trailing only briefly along her skin. It was the kind of gesture that didn't ask permission anymore. Not because it presumed, but because it trusted. Inside, the cabin was no longer a place for survival. It was alive with sound now. The clatter of tin cups, the laughter of children, the scrape of Chain's carving knife on wood. Suri had begun to hum as she worked. Claire found herself humming back. They braided rope together in the evenings, their fingers overlapping in quiet harmony. Claire had taken down the shutters for good. The windows, clean now, caught the morning sun like they'd been waiting for it. Curtains she had once sewn in silence were finally fluttering, dancing. She had not asked him to stay. But the question had long since dissolved, the way snow does when it forgets it was once cold. He had built a cradle from pine, polished each slat until it gleamed like honey. He hadn't said why at first. Had simply placed it in the corner near the fire. A gift. A promise. One morning, Claire stood on the porch and pressed her hand to her belly, silent. Not fearful. Not surprised. Just still. A new rhythm had begun to beat inside her. She didn't tell him that day. She watched instead. Watched him build the new fence line with Hawk trotting beside him like a colt. Watched him lean down to tie Suri's boot when the string came loose. Watched the way he paused to smell the stew before taking a bite. As if to confirm, yes, this is good. This is home. At night, they lay close but spoke little. Words no longer had to carry the weight. She knew his thoughts by the way his fingers moved, circling gently over her wrist, tracing lines only he could see. He knew hers by the way she breathed when he was near. But the town hadn't forgotten. Not entirely. One morning, a letter came, folded in rough parchment, dropped by a courier too young to understand its weight. It was a summons. Not a trial, not yet, but an invitation wrapped in threat. The town council would appreciate a word. There were murmurs again. Of land ownership, of custody, of the unnaturalness of their arrangement. It didn't say so, but it was all there between the lines. Claire read it at the table, eyes calm. Chain sat across from her, chewing slowly. When he saw her expression, he stopped. She passed him the note. He read it, folded it again, set it down. "We don't have to go," he said. "We do," she replied. "But not to plead." His brow furrowed slightly. "We go to tell them," she said, voice low, "that this isn't a secret anymore. That we won't whisper. That we won't vanish because they feel more comfortable when we do." The next day, she dressed in her best. The old blue dress with the faded hem and the mended seams. She braided her hair the way her mother had once taught her, tight, with a red ribbon woven through. She carried the eagle carving with her, the one Chain had made. A token of memory. A symbol of protection. They rode into town together. The street quieted as they passed. No one threw stones. No one spat. But their silence was loud. Inside the meeting hall, the council sat like barn owls, wise in their own minds, blinking behind papers and pride. "You've made a choice," the oldest said, eyes on Claire. "I've made a life," she answered. "It's a complicated situation," another said. "It's only complicated if you make it so." They asked if the children were hers. "Yes," she said, as much as breath is mine. They asked if she was in danger. She smiled. Only from fools. The questions kept coming, each one trying to cut around the edges of the real thing. Of love. Of family. Of what it meant when something didn't fit inside their boundaries. Finally, Chain stood. Said nothing at first. Just looked them in the eye, one by one. Then, in a voice so steady it silenced even the wood creaking beneath them, he said, "I was a ghost when I came here. My children were fading. She gave us breath. She gave us land. I will not let you take it." And that was all. No verdict was spoken that day. No law passed down. But when they left, the townspeople stepped aside. Not kindly. Not welcoming. But with space. And sometimes, space is the beginning of peace. They returned home in dusk, the sky brushed in lavender and rose. The children ran to meet them. Leia had made a crown from dandelions. Suri held a drawing, a rough picture of 5 figures, all holding hands. Hawk ran circles around the mule, shrieking with joy. Claire watched it all with a quiet ache in her chest. Not sorrow. Something else. She turned to Chain. "They're ours." He nodded, and his hand found hers. That night, they lit every lamp. Set stew on the fire. Laughed loudly. Let the wind hear them. Later, by the hearth, Claire finally told him. Took his hand. Placed it on her belly. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Then, slowly, reverently, he knelt. Pressed his forehead to her abdomen. His breath was warm. His hands trembling. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. Not of fear. Not of doubt. Of awe. He whispered something in Comanche, soft and sacred. She didn't ask what it meant. She only closed her eyes and let it settle into her bones. Outside, spring bloomed in earnest. Wildflowers pushed through broken soil. Birds wove nests from bits of old rope and hay. The wind carried no omen now, only song. And in that cabin, tucked into the belly of a land that had once forgotten them, a family held fast. Not forged in blood, but in choice. In morning bread. In shared silence. In trust earned slowly, held tightly. There was no thunder that night. No lightning. No final battle. Only breath. Only stillness. And the miracle that had come quiet as snowfall and stayed like the roots of something that no longer feared being seen.